A bustling marketplace in Verona filled with townspeople from all walks of life. Vendors shout, children run around, and tensions simmer in the air as members of the Capulet and Montague families exchange hostile glances. Two groups of servants from the Capulet and Montague households face off in a narrow, cobbled street. Anger boils over, and a violent brawl ensues, with swords drawn and onlookers scattering. Prince Escalus stands on a raised platform, towering over the Capulets and Montagues, as he delivers a fierce ultimatum to end the violence. His expression is stern, his voice echoing through the silent, tense crowd. A thoughtful Romeo sits in a secluded garden, surrounded by roses and vines, his face filled with melancholy, as he gazes into the distance, lost in thoughts of unrequited love. Mercutio, Benvolio, and Romeo at the masquerade entrance, dressed in elaborate masks and finery. Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio look both mischievous and nervous as they prepare to sneak into the Capulets' grand masquerade. Mercutio's playful, mocking monologue. Mercutio, lively and animated, delivers a witty, provocative speech to Romeo, gesturing and laughing as he tries to lift his friend's spirits. A candlelit courtyard setting adding to the energy of the moment. Juliet, in an elegant dress and a delicate mask, twirls gracefully amid the crowd, the lights around her flickering and illuminating her youthful, enchanting expression. Romeo and Juliet speak softly under the dim light of the ballroom, their eyes locked, hands reaching towards each other, as if they are the only two people in the world. The moment Romeo learns Juliet is a Capulet, Romeo's face falls as he overhears a guest whisper that Juliet is a Capulet. He looks conflicted, the joy of the evening suddenly overshadowed by dread. Romeo hiding in the shadows of the Capulet garden, Romeo stands in the shadows beneath Juliet's balcony, moonlight casting a faint glow as he listens, mesmerized, to her speaking her thoughts aloud. Juliet leaning on her balcony, longing for Romeo, Juliet rests her arms on the stone balcony, looking up at the stars, her expression filled with a yearning for Romeo, as vines and flowers frame her eye silhouette against the night sky. The lovers' first secret kiss on the balcony. Romeo and Juliet share a tender, stolen kiss beneath her balcony, their faces lit by the moonlight, as they hold each other close, despite the danger of being discovered. Juliet's contemplative moment after Romeo leaves. Juliet remains on the balcony, touching her lips and looking after Romeo with a mix of love and fear as dawn's first light begins to break over the horizon. Romeo and Juliet's wedding in Friar Lawrence's chapel. In a small, candlelit chapel, Romeo and Juliet hold hands and exchange solemn vows in front of Friar Lawrence, the scene both intimate and reverent. Friar Lawrence preparing the wedding rituals. Friar Lawrence carefully arranges candles and flowers in the chapel, his expression one of concern and wisdom, sensing the gravity of the young lover's decision. Romeo and Juliet exchanging rings. Romeo and Juliet place rings on each other's fingers, their faces glowing with happiness and a deep sense of commitment, surrounded by the quiet, sacred atmosphere of the chapel. Romeo's encounter with Tybalt in the street. Romeo, initially calm and composed, tries to talk Tybalt down, but tension is thick in the air. Tybalt's eyes flash with rage, and he is ready to strike. Mercutio's death scene. A mortally wounded Mercutio lies on the ground, his face pale, as he curses both the Montagues and Capulets, Romeo kneeling beside him, horror-stricken. Romeo's expression of grief and rage after killing Tybalt. Romeo stands over Tybalt's body, his face filled with horror and regret, his sword still drawn, as onlookers gasp in shock. Prince Escalus condemning Romeo to exile. The prince stands with authority, proclaiming Romeo's exile to a distraught crowd as Romeo looks devastated, his entire future collapsing around him. Romeo's farewell to Juliet at dawn. Romeo and Juliet hold each other desperately as dawn breaks, tears streaming down their faces, as they share a heart-wrenching goodbye in her bedroom. Juliet holding the vial of potion in her hand. Juliet sits alone in her room, staring at the small vial, her expression a mix of fear and determination, candles casting shadows around her. Juliet's apparent death in the Capulet household. Juliet lies motionless on her bed, pale and serene, while her family weeps around her, believing her to be dead. Romeo learning of Juliet's death in Mantua, Romeo receives the devastating news and collapses with grief, clutching a letter in his hand, his eyes filled with despair. Romeo's lonely ride back to Verona. A heartbroken Romeo rides alone on horseback under a dark, overcast sky, determined to reach Juliet's tomb, his face set with grim resolve. Romeo in the apothecary's shop. Romeo exchanges coins with a grim, weathered apothecary, receiving a small vial of poison, as he prepares for the final moments of his life. Juliet's tomb lit by flickering torches. Inside the dim, cavernous tomb, Romeo approaches Juliet's resting place, his face a mixture of love and sorrow.
In the tragic scene, Romeo finds himself beside Juliet's lifeless form. His heart is heavy, burdened by love and despair. He speaks softly, his voice choked with profound emotion. Holding her cold hand, he reflects on their short-lived romance. As he prepares to drink the poison, his sorrow deepens. This poignant moment compels the audience toward action. Juliet awakens in the dawn's soft light. A stillness envelops her surroundings. Her gaze falls upon Romeo beside her. A tragic sight greets her eyes. Juliet's heart sinks in despair. Shock and anguish consume her being. The weight of loss is unbearable. Immediate action is needed to honor love.
Juliet's final moment with Romeo's dagger. In a moment of resolve, Juliet picks up Romeo's dagger, holding it to her heart, as she prepares to join him in death. The families discovering Romeo and Juliet's bodies. The Capulets and Montagues stand in shock and sorrow over the bodies of their children, overwhelmed by the loss and the senselessness of their feud. Friar Lawrence trying to explain to the families. Friar Lawrence, weary and devastated, stands before the grieving families, recounting the events that led to the tragedy. The Montague and Capulet fathers shaking hands in reconciliation, the heads of the two families, somber and remorseful, clasp hands in the final scene, silently vowing to end their feud. Juliet watching a sunrise, dreaming of freedom. Juliet stands on her balcony, watching the first rays of dawn, her eyes filled with dreams of a life free from her family's expectations. Romeo gazing at the night sky, filled with longing. Romeo stands on a hillside overlooking Verona, gazing up at the stars, his thoughts filled with dreams of love and escape. Friar Lawrence alone in his garden with medicinal herbs. Friar Lawrence tends to his herbs, contemplating the risks he's taken to help the young lovers, the light dim and somber around him. Juliet sitting by a window, holding a rose. Juliet holds a red rose and looks out the window, symbolizing her longing for love amid the constraints of her family's expectations. Romeo writing a farewell letter to his father. In a dimly lit room, Romeo writes a final letter, expressing his love for Juliet, and the sorrow he feels about leaving his family behind. A final shot of the empty Capulet and Montague houses. The Capulet and Montague houses stand silent and empty, as if mourning the losses and the peace that finally fell over Verona after tragedy.